And we chose 9 a.m. on Monday so we can start the week with a little bit of waking up so we can, maybe learn something and apply it to our next week. So I'm really glad to be here today with a good friend and guest of mine. Her name is Lori Schneider. Lori, welcome.
Hello.
And today we are going to talk about food is our medicine. Discovering the essence of wild, native, and medicinal plants that are literally all around us. Plants is one of the foundations and pillars of PMC Global, which is, our group and our family here that we're broadcasting with. And one of our pillars is about a plant-based diet. And it was really kind of a funny story years ago when I was working my corporate gig. I had met a UBC, which is the University of British Columbia here. I'd met a woman who was actually a geneticist, and we were talking about health and the best things that are going on. And she had said that, our pharmaceuticals and things have, maybe up to 80, 90 genetic expressions that they can kind of pull and make work for us to change our health. And plants, she was saying, are up to 300 plus genetic expressions. And when we look at plants and a plant-based diet, that's really nature. And in my learning many years ago, and one of my breakthroughs when I changed to become vegetarian and everything, it was just about, raw, natural, organic, clean foods. That's the best way, I started thinking differently. Everything changed for me when that changed. And I've never been a pharmaceutical guy because I, quite frankly, knock on wood, I've always been pretty healthy, and I haven't had to see the doctor in ages. And I believe part of that is eating a plant-based diet and having a good mindset. So now Lori is a herbalist, and she is an amazing woman. I met her through our Spirit Plant Medicine community. As many of you know, we do Spirit Plant Medicine Conference going into its 10th year. And Lori does nature walks and talks about medicinal plants and everything that's going on, that we wouldn't even know. Even in our backyard, there's amazing things that, she said, oh, no, that's it. And I'm like, oh, the thing drives me crazy. It's prolific. And she goes, oh, no, you can do all sorts of things with it. So Lori has gracefully accepted to be my guest this morning. Lori, welcome. Thank you for your wake-up call. And maybe you can tell us, about yourself, what got you into this line of work, what's maybe your, what it means to you to be a herbalist in the work you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Marc, for inviting me to be here today. I'm really honored. And so what I could tell you a little bit about myself, I grew up in the 60s. I was born back in the 60s up in Squamish, so not far from Vancouver, beautiful logging and pulp making town. And my backyard was the forest, so that was my playground. And it turned out my next door neighbor was from Ireland. So she didn't actually know any of the plants. So she took it upon herself to get to know this geography, like, know the fauna and the flora here. And she'd walk us kids up the back trails to Alice Lake and introduced us. So here's the cedar tree, here's the Douglas fir, here's the fireweed, the salal berries, miner's lettuce, licorice root, like whatever. All of those plants was that beginning introduction. And really, that's what I want to be doing, Marc, is really start people on that introduction. We have to remember that plants are our older brothers and sisters. They've been here much longer than us. And as we know from this community, the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, and this community, is there's an intelligence and a wisdom that's coming from the plants. So yes, they can be psychedelic in their nature, or they can just be beautiful foods, and recognizing those foods truly are our medicine. So your story there, Marc, is, the pharmaceuticals are a fat-based product that actually sit in our cells. So this is where we can get lots of side effects. And of course, they're not very complex at all. Plants are water-based, so they tend to flush through the body. Now, with that being said, I will let you know there are plants there that are poisonous, and we really need to know. There's lots of plants like mushrooms that have similar looking cousins or relatives, so that we need to really look at those details to make sure we're actually harvesting the proper plant. I'd also say it's really important to harvest it at the right time. So you're actually getting the best energy, the best vibration of that plant and taking it into your body. So my next door neighbor, Mrs. Brunn, I'm super grateful for her to start me on this journey. And that really made that imprint for me. So all my life, I've had a love of plants. I studied horticulture, aromatherapy. Then I took a course in herbology, as well as permaculture. So I just kept, building on that knowledge. And then when I turned 50, I asked.
Last week.
It's been 7 years now. When I turned 50, what's beautiful about each decade, and I feel that as I get older, life gets better. Truly. Maybe things slow down.
I agree. Yeah.
Things are slowing down, but that's okay because I'm seeing more. Right. And I heard somebody say not too long ago, the pace of nature. And I really, that term really hit my heart deeply, because I started to think, well, if we're nature, what is my pace? And what's the fastest I can go, which is running as fast as I can go. But, the other day I was in a meditation, and all of a sudden I was saying, this is a pace too, is to be still and feel like the plants. And, so I was sitting in the backyard, and I would only let my eyes go as far as they could go without moving my head. And I was taking in the panorama, the sounds, just being still and going, this is also my nature. So grateful for Mrs. Brunn. My herb teacher is Don Olson, and really grateful for him. And as I said, when I turned 50, I asked Creator, what do you want me to do? How can I be in service? And this is actually what started to show up. And it was slow. The truth was, it was slow because people weren't quite ready for it. And so I'd kind of go, really? Nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden I get an email or I get a phone call. And it has allowed me to be here right now in this moment, so I can share what I've been doing for the last 7 years, but really my whole life, but really focused in the last 7 years.
I think it's beautiful because, you talk about preparation, and this is what I think, just one of those signs of life is everything that we've done in our life is preparing us really for what's next. And we don't always know what that is. We might have a vision or what that, what we want, which is a great thing to have. Visualization is the power of creation with language. And I think it's great because sometimes we don't know, I've done something, I want to do this, and I get a great education within that path. Yet when I get to, that success or that achievement of it, it's like, this isn't really what I wanted. However, what I learned bringing me to that place was actually things I could apply, like even this live stream, even being able to do these videos. I would have thought that, in a million years necessarily, even though it was in my mind, but everything I'd done, studying marketing and internet stuff and different things, to be able to even bring a show like this, to you guys. So I think it's always important to understand how those things prepare us. And what I think is really interesting is in these, I'll call them COVID times, even though I don't like using that word. But one of the most, a lot of people now are unemployed. They're not making as much money. There's things going on. And yet in every change in the markets, in the world, in our society, anytime there's a change in one area, there's opportunities in another. And one of the top growing niches that has exploded in this whole COVID thing is gardening and, I don't even know what the word would be, but people growing their own vegetable gardens. We did it this year. We had extra time. We've got a bunch of great stuff growing in the yard. So I think, you've been preparing for this time. And in our conversations, you're getting busier and busier. I saw your schedule last week and it was full, right? Because people are looking for natural ways to heal themselves. And when they have time now, they actually have time to grow their garden because they're not working all the time. Right.
That's that pace, the pace of nature. And I, of course, somebody asked me about this time the other day, Lori, what's your thoughts about it? I said, it's a birthing experience, and I've birthed 2 girls into the world. So beautiful. I said, it's very difficult, but it's really incredibly beautiful. Nice. So, and having this time to actually reflect what's important, what are my values, how can I contribute, why am I here, like really asking those questions, those deep questions of ourselves. Why are we here? And it's about relationships, right? It's about having the time to be in relationship, not only with our friends and family, but to be outside in nature and build that relationship. And then remember, we're actually part of this system. There's a beautiful term that I came across recently. It's called ecological consciousness.
Ooh.
I'm a butterfly ranger with the David Suzuki Foundation. So yeah. So part of what I've been doing is educating people around native plants to make sure we have them. So wherever you are on the planet, know that you should have at least 50% of native plants growing in your garden. So this is going to feed the birds, the bees, the butterflies, and all the other insects. The other thing about the insect world is that very few of them are actually pests. And what's happening is we're losing them all over the planet, which is really, really sad.
Well,
right?
let's talk about this for a moment.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important where, first off, you talk about the pace of nature. And especially in the Western world, and I know PMC is, kind of originated, I think, for PMC Global in India, so a large audience is in that neck of the woods, but it's a global movement. We've got people all over the world. And so when we talk about, the pace of nature, are we living our lives naturally in this Western world when we're running around, working 9 to 5, stressed out, and all of these things are happening? Pharmaceuticals, we're not eating right, we're not taking care of our bodies, and we're not, in my opinion, we're not going with the pace of nature. Nature doesn't rush. When you plant that seed, it has you can't force it to grow faster. You can do things to nurture it so it has optimal growing conditions, yes, right? But you can't force it to bloom before it's ready. And I think it's a great metaphor for the way that we live our lives today. So I want everybody to wake up to that. And this is the benefit that's happening in the world today, is everything is slowed down. There's not as much travel. There's not as much business. There's even still today here in Vancouver, it's still pretty quiet. There's not a lot of planes in the air. The air's cleaner. There's something about this time in human history that we've never had in the most past 100 years of just going within. And then we go back to nature, right? And you talk about native plants, and you said something to me last week when we were talking, and I said, well, our community is global, and they're in different parts of the world, and you said something about colonialism and familiar plants that are pretty much everywhere because of colonialism. So maybe you can share something about that, because it ties in what you were just saying about what should be in your yard. So what happened specifically here into Canada, and I'm sure that's happened in other places of the planet, is when the settlers and the colonials were coming into what we refer to as Turtle Island, is they didn't recognize the plants. Just like I'm talking about my Irish neighbor, she didn't know any of the plants at all. So there were a couple things. The government actually said for you to have land, you had to cut down the plants to grow food. And of course, that forest was where we got our food from, right? My history is Scottish and French and Welsh, but also of 8 nations here on Turtle Island in North America. So they cut down the forest, grow the food, but also bring their own plants. So they would feel familiar. So they wouldn't feel so homesick, because that's the truth, right? We get imprinted with that around us. So really what I feel like part of this wake up movement is really about decolonizing our mind, right? So where's our indigeneity, if we could even say that? Where am I originally from? And what were the plants and medicines that my ancestors were working with, which had that relationship with, right? And I sometimes think there's a key there in terms of our health
I used to work as a flight attendant, and I remember meeting this beautiful little Japanese girl, and she was having some challenges with her health. And I said, "What are you eating?" And so I said, "Are you eating your sushi? Are you eating your seaweed? Are you eating your rice? Like, are you eating those pickled and fermented vegetables?" And she was like, "No." And I said, "Maybe that's where some of your challenges are, is not eating your cultural diet." Because our genetics don't change in 50 years. This Western diet has only been around for a very short period of time.
And what's interesting about the Western diet, when you go into the supermarket, everything's the same. Like how much broccoli, cauliflower, beets. Now, good food, don't get me wrong, but there's some interesting stuff out there.
Beautiful.
And there's a huge movement. In Vancouver, we're blessed because we got this kind of hippie granola kind of, awakened community quite a bit here. A lot of great stores, a lot of great opportunities for different natural, organic, wild foods. So I think there's a shift that's happening, and it's taking time because people are waking up. And if we can inspire you to wake up to a different way of thinking and looking at the plants that are around you. And we're blessed here in BC, like the mushrooms. You can go foraging for mushrooms in the forests here and get chaga and all sorts of stuff. Right, so there's a lot going on that we're not really aware of, and it's kind of a funny thing. My grandfather, when I got to know him a little bit better in his older years, he was of Dutch descent, and he shared a story that he learned from his parents, and he was just saying, always have a home where you can grow your own food. Always have a yard. And in this, one of the things I learned, we talk about colonialism, and we're in a pretty nice neighborhood here in Vancouver, beautiful yards, all manicured and trimmed and, mowed the lawns.
Very colonial.
Yep, exactly. And very few gardens.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if every home had a garden. It's amazing how much food you can grow. And, that's what we've done. And, you've taken a look and give us some ideas for even more. Laura says, you can grow a lot of food here. And it's true. And we started this year with a good one. And I want to also touch, when you're talking about the insects and the bees and how, and this is the balance of nature. So when different species also go extinct because we've, pillaged the forest and the lands and taken away their habitat. We had a no mow May thing going on. Which is a movement to not mow your grass for the month of May, and it was for the bees and the insects. So we did that. And I did it again in June. I cut the grass on June 1st, and we haven't cut it since. And it's beautiful. It's like a meadow. We got buttercups and clover, insects and bees flying around. And it's just something that was really important to us, as a conscious community. We don't need to cut the grass all the time. We don't. I like it. It looks neat and clean. And that's just a representation of my colonialism that I've been conditioned and brought up in, because I didn't know any different. That's just what we did.
That's your imprint.
Yeah. And you remember we talked about conditioning and, these values and beliefs in some of our earlier shows, that we get raised this way because we don't know. This is how we've been trained, right?
Yeah.
So it's about now waking up to the new way and looking at nature, because nature, in my opinion, and my experience now, is by far the best medicine, right? Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I learned the closer you can eat to the ground, raw, clean, organic, the healthier you'll be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So eating in the seasons is really, really important. And that's part of the messaging that I really want to bring, or that awareness to others, is to really follow that season, because we are a biological organism. And as I mentioned that term earlier, ecological consciousness, what that refers to is when we are experiencing ourselves in relationship to something else that is living, and we discover we're actually part of the ecosystem. So we actually have a role to play. Like we are just in one little other piece within this web on the global planet. So, and part of that, going back here, that I just said, eating through the season, if I'm a biological organism like everything else that's living, I'm affected by the sunlight like everything else. So when the sun comes up in the east, it's a blue spectrum light, and it hits the eyes, and that wakes me up. And when the sun's going down in the west, it goes yellow, orange, red, and that red spectrum light hits the eyes, and that helps to produce the melatonin to help me to sleep. And of course, sleep is really important in this whole equation, because that's when the toxins get flushed from the brain. It's when the body has a chance to repair itself. You obviously have more energy to, start your day again. So when we start to understand who we are, our functions, our relationships, then we can hopefully make better choices. And, I was listening to a documentary movie on YouTube today and yesterday called Reconnect. And this is with Dennis McKinnon.
Oh, hey, nice segue.
Okay.
Dennis McKenna is our guest next week.
Yes.
You want to tell them who Dennis McKenna is?
No.
Because that's going to be exciting.
Oh, no, Mark, you tell. I hardly know Dennis at all, and you know so much about him, so please.
Dennis McKenna is the brother of a very famous psychonaut, Terence McKenna. And the work that they did was psychedelics and mushrooms, ayahuasca, and everything else. Terence, his brother, kind of brought it to the forefront, and Dennis is kind of, after Terence passed, kind of taken over the spotlight in that sense as a botanist and the things he does as well in the plant medicine world. And we're going to talk about the power of plant medicines next week with Dennis. And I love his line. It's symbiosis, baby.
Yeah.
Right? So we're gonna talk about that. But he's a brilliant man when it comes down to plants as medicine, especially in the psychedelic and entheogenic world. Anyway, sorry.
No. That's all. No, it's all perfect. It's all perfect. So the gentleman that they were interviewing, or who I think actually was the brainchild, or I'm not sure who put the movie together, but anyways, his name is Brian Rose. And he has a program over in England. But here was one of the things that he said, and I found that really powerful, is that he says, because he lives in England, he said, there's very few parks there. He said, so I don't think about nature. And it's true. Exactly. So if we don't have it around us, why would we be thinking about it? Now, a beautiful woman, Diana Beresford Kruger, who did a documentary called The Call of the Forest, and she's a biochemist and a botanist. She's an amazing woman who lives in Ontario. She was showing in her documentary how in Japan, they were creating these tiny little mini forests on certain street corners. And you would actually find a little frog in there. So it really inspired me to think about, how do we look at our cities and how do we create more of that type of setting here? Here in Vancouver, we have a shade canopy of about 18%. And the city's mandate is to do it for 40%. Oh, wow. So we have a little ways to go. Now, think about that. If we had more trees growing, then when the summer comes and it gets pretty hot here, and we're getting hotter and hotter every year, all that pavement, all that concrete reflecting the light, with all the trees, will create these shade corridors. We won't have to use as much aircon, we'll feel better because our energy can still be up, because, the sun can really zap your energy, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, when you look at, these concrete jungles, it disconnects us from nature. We get so caught up again in that Western pattern of thinking and doing and be, achieve, make more money, conquer the world, all of those things. And what I see at times is it disconnects us from spirit, right? And if you really want to connect with spirit in a great way, part of that is connecting with nature, because there's power in that. Oh. And if you're watching and you live in a city and you haven't gotten out to the park or jumped in an ocean or a lake or a river or something of that nature, that's your exercise in the next week. Connect with nature in some way, shape, or form before we come back with next week. Go hug a tree.
So nature actually heals us. So when we swim in the ocean, our body gets pressurized, and it actually helps with our high blood pressure. When we touch the earth, when we've got our our feet on the earth, or we're laying on the earth, there's an electromagnetic frequency that's actually pulling free radicals out of the body. So you can Google grounding and you can learn more about that.
Bare feet on the dirt,
Absolutely.
grass, and the
Right.
forest.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So when we're gardening and we've got our hands in the soil, those microorganisms in there are actually doing two things. One, they actually change the chemicals in our brain. So it actually makes us feel better, which makes complete sense. Otherwise, we would have never put our hands in the soil.
Mhm.
The other is those microorganisms, we actually need to get into our gut, into what we call the biome. So we want to have a diversity inside the body as we have a diversity outside of the body, right? Diversity of plants, insects, birds, even cultures, right? Recognizing we're one human family, but we have a diversity within that human family. So we really want to make sure everything is staying strong to create a really strong planet. And okay, go ahead.
No, what I want to talk about while we're on that is, I think it's really important too, again, in these crazy, let's call them COVID times, we're being told to be using hand sanitizers, wash your hands more, all of these things. And from what I've learned and what I happen to believe is that's worse for us because we're not building our immune system. Get your hands in the dirt, do all of those things in nature, and that exposes you to things that keeps your natural biology working in a way that can protect you from not just COVID, but anything.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a good immune system, your body, nature is the best healer.
Yeah.
Right. And hand sanitizer, there's nothing natural about that, is there?
No. Well, you could make it with natural ingredients, but really the best thing is just to wash your hands and just wash the part, this part of your hand, so you're not drying out your skin on the other side. You're not eating on that with that part of your hand, right?
Essential oils too.
Yeah.
I hear lavender is an antibacterial and really
antiseptic. Oh yeah, it's great.
So there are different ways than using alcohol that dries out your skin, and just kills everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's just relevant to today's time. Go dig in the garden.
Yeah. Yeah. And that digging and those microorganisms, the ones that we find here in our geography are specific to this geography. So if this is where I live, then I should be eating from here. Mm-hmm. And here in Canada, especially here in Vancouver, we have a huge ecological footprint that's anywhere from 6,000 to 7,000 miles. Right? So those foods that are coming here, those microorganisms are going to be different. But here's the other thing. They're not even going to be there anymore because they would have already died. So we've actually, the way that I'm looking at it is that I've started to see how fragile we've actually become because we're not eating so locally. So I want to just...
Well, and when we talk about locally and seasonal,
like
it's important. As a human animal, we're not in... Where we live here in Vancouver, shouldn't really be eating bananas in the winter.
No.
Because we don't get them here.
Yeah.
And we need that sugar when we need energy in a hotter climate or wherever that is. And that's why, there's a whole thing what they call 100-mile diet too.
Yeah.
Right? Like eat locally, eat fresh from around where you're at. Because your body will work and respond seasonally based on what's available.
Yes.
And that makes sense because if you look at nature, you look at the deers and the bear and anything that's out there, they're not out getting food from South America or Central America or China or wherever it's coming from. They're foraging in the woods where they are.
Yeah. So it was interesting. Just want to share a little story. So last May, we had record-breaking temperatures, right? And there was a huge concern because we're a rainforest. And so I was listening to one of our national radio stations, and people had been phoning in, and they were really upset that the weather person was going, oh, another beautiful May day, and we're up 12 degrees, et cetera, et cetera. And so people were calling in and saying, you need to call it for what it is. We've got a global crisis going on. The temperatures are rising. This affects the insects. When we lose the insects, we lose us. So one of the callers phoned in. He says, we're in a crisis. When we went through a crisis during the Second World War, we were told to grow gardens. Mm-hmm. He said, that's really what we should be doing, is growing our gardens. So Victory Gardens, they were called Victory Gardens, and they were growing upwards of 40% of their own food. Now think about that. How does that affect your budget, right? How does it make you feel? what kind of relationship starts to happen with your neighbor as you've got too much zucchini, or you've got these prized tomatoes or cucumbers, and now you want to share them with your neighbors. So it's there's so much reward in that.
So much spinach and kale out there,
right?
We got to start eating.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's really fun, you know what I love?
Yeah,
we got a big lettuce thing on my deck outside here. We've got a bunch of greens growing in the garden, but it's fun to just get out there and just start grazing. Fresh picked right from the garden. There is nothing like it. And another thing I learned in a bunch of stuff I was doing years ago was the power of our energy, our care, our love, and our attention as we are growing our own food. If you're to measure the energy and the quality of the food from what you grow in the garden to what you pick up at a supermarket, off the charts. Because it hasn't been picked early, shipped halfway across the world, it's garden to mouth.
Yeah, everything is energy, Mark.
Yeah.
Everything is energy, right? So, the person who's preparing your food, their energy is going into that food, right? Yeah. Now, here's the thing. When you're out in your garden and you're picking your lettuces and your kale, you could possibly be picking some of your dandelion and your chickweed.
Well, that's what I want. I want to kind of switch gears.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about, medicinal, wild and native plants, my question, and I think one of those, what you mentioned was one of the answers, is what would you say is probably the most common thing globally that people aren't aware of, that is totally...
Dandelion. That's the first one that always comes to my mind. It's traveled all over the world. What I understand from my research, it originated in Greece and only travels where there are people. So, and when I worked as a flight attendant, there were two things I always did. Wherever I traveled to, I'd always go to the parks because I wanted to see what wild foods I could find. Yeah. And the other, I'd always go to the grocery store because I was always curious to see what kind of foods were in the grocery store. Yeah. So everything really revolved a lot around food, because food is our medicine. Absolutely. And I love eating really, really good food. I really, really appreciate it. So, while you're in that garden, what you want to be doing in creating your garden is making sure it has that diversity. So you've got your vegetables growing, you've got your culinary herbs happening, because these are all antiviral. Right? And they can handle really dry conditions. They're also amazing pollinator plants, whether it's the bees or the butterflies, right? They're amazingly beautiful. Those aromas, those essence that you're smelling when they get broken open are actually helping with your immune system and your lungs. And Mark, you mentioned the immune system earlier. There's a few things that happen. The immune system, to activate it, is you have to be in what we call the parasympathetic system. So if you're in the sympathetic, you're stressed out, you're in fear, all the blood,
like Western living.
Yeah, exactly. All the blood has gone away from digestion and all the other organs, and it's in the fight or flight, right? The adrenals have cut in, the cortisol is now flowing through the body. Immune system's not working. So parasympathetic is really important. So this is actually, part of the message, the prayers that are coming down from the Andes, from the elders up there, to stay in a high vibration, to stay in love, in compassion, forgiveness, in our joy. Like, wow, we're alive in this moment. Wow, what an incredible gift. And so how do we honor that gift that we're alive is by being in that relationship with each other. And practices of respect and reciprocity, remembering our responsibility, and also a reverence, like that gratitude. And the other way we activate the immune system is by hugging. So 5 hugs a day for 30 seconds. So with your family,
that 30 minimum 20.
Right.
I've learned.
Okay.
Right? Okay. No, I'm just 30 is better.
Yeah.
Because you notice when you hug people, usually it's short.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the heart-to-heart hug, that one?
Oh, yeah. Yes, of course.
There's a way of hugging that if you hug heart-to-heart, which is basically to your left and the other person's left, your hearts will actually be in alignment.
Wow.
And the energy that transmutes there, that's been tested with kinesiology and everything, is much more powerful than when you hug the other way, because then your hearts aren't connected. Right? So if someone hugs me one way, I'll either interrupt it to hug heart to heart, or I will hug once, and I'll say, now let's balance that out with a heart-to-heart hug, because our hearts are, a very, very powerful, organ.
Absolutely.
It's what's the first thing that gets formed, that as
Yes.
we grow, right?
Yeah.
So I think hugging is super important, and I want to give people a trick that I learned of how to give the best hug. Right? It's a principle that we call matching and mirroring, and it's how people, and they found some of the best people who get rapport and great relationships is they match and mirror. So it's almost like mimicking the other person. So because the subconscious says, oh, I like this person because they're like me, and it makes that decision really fast. And they'll say, I don't really like this person as much because they're not like me. So if you use some of the same words, some of the same gestures and things like that, there's this really interesting psychological, these are the nuggets that I'm sharing with you, right? There's the psychological, subconscious connection where we make, a judgment call or a, whatever we want to call that. And so the way to give the best hug is to mirror back the way the other person is hugging you. Some people go in and give you a great big bear hug.
Right.
I'll give them a big bear hug. That's not what you like.
Right.
Right. And they'll be like, wow, that was the best hug. They give you 3 pats on the shoulder, because some people give you a little pat. Some people give you a little soft hug. So just mirror their hug back to them. And what's going to happen is, so often they'll go, wow, that was a great hug, because you've hugged them like they hug.
Right. It's kind of like the language of love, right?
Yeah,
like what is somebody's language of expressing their love?
Data, right?
Right.
Languages and things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just a fun little nugget.
Yeah.
And it's fun to play with it, because he doesn't love a good hug.
Yeah.
And the time of the hug is where that energy allows you to kind of. Right?
Yeah, someone gave me a bear hug the other night, and really it felt really good. It's not the way I usually hug, but I was like, wow. But I didn't know that. So next time I'll really hug them back.
Yeah, the way they do that, because the longer the hug, you will actually feel it in the other person and yourself as you just kind of drop down into, and you'll just feel this soothing relaxation where people just let go. And it becomes the most beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Because when it comes down to intimacy and connection and things, where it's like, oh yeah, okay.
Right.
So we're getting there, but not fully. And there's a power in a hug for sure.
Absolutely.
So I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about some of these other great plants. So dandelion is everywhere. We know that. And I think it's interesting because here we are, one of the best plants out there, and we've been conditioned to think it's a weed and a pest.
And that's because somebody made a lot of money selling those chemicals. So after the Second World War, after the Second World War, it was like, what can we do with them? Well, if we put it on dandelion, it actually kills it. Oh, let's tell everyone to get rid of the dandelion. Which is, it's unfortunate that we've made some of those choices, but now that we're waking up, we can start to reverse those choices, and we can also start to imprint our children, because our children are actually the future. They're the ones that are going to carry all of this knowledge forward. And who was it? Charles Darwin, who talked about survival of the species. He wasn't actually referring to duking it out. He was referring to that we pass on our knowledge, right? That's what plants do. They pass on the knowledge, right? That's what animals do. They pass on their knowledge. So that's what
our elders do. They pass on the knowledge.
Yeah.
Right?
So we want to get reacquainted with the dandelion, right? And recognize that every part of the dandelion is edible. Like, how wonderful. The flower, the stem, the leaf, the root, and even the seed. And this year, you know what I did? The other thing that I want to help to bring people up into their awareness is to collect the seeds. So whatever you're growing, to collect the seeds. So I started collecting dandelion seeds so I can move those seeds other places. I catch them before they go into that beautiful sphere. And
then the parents would be like, no,
but see,
one more dandelion.
Right. So, and that's the thing, Marc. We intrinsically knew part of our responsibility is to actually move the seeds, like the bears, the birds, the dogs, the deer, like everybody's moving the wind, everybody's moving the seeds. So that's part of our responsibility as well, is to move those seeds, right? So I can't say enough about dandelion. I mean, really, it is one
Great
of the.
for your liver, I know that.
Oh, so the root is good for the liver. The leaf is good for the kidneys, helping to flush them out, replacing them with potassium. The stem is quite bitter. I chop it up, fry it with butter and garlic, and then I scramble my eggs in there for about 3 weeks, right? And I love it. The bitter, what's important about bitter, so every flavor, so in Ayurvedic medicine, different flavors have a different affinity. So that what bitter does is it gets the gallbladder to produce the bile that goes into the stomach to break down the fats, which we need for our brain, right? And the thing is about bitters, especially as we're aging, our hydrochloric acid, we don't produce as much. So we actually need more help when we're aging, right? Right? We just need a little bit more support. So what will happen at first when you have the bitters, you go, oh my goodness, that is so strong. But over time, you'll actually start to crave them and you'll actually really find that they're not that bitter. So it's educating the palate, right? So, walking into new areas sometimes feel, there's a little bit of trepidation. Are you sure I can do this? Because we've been so conditioned other ways. And, I use the plants as my medicine. So if I get an infection in my body, if I want to go and find out what it is what kind of infection I have, and maybe the doctor tells me an antibiotic, I never take the antibiotic. I actually have plant medicines that are antibiotic in their nature. Now, for someone first starting out, that's going to feel a little uncomfortable, but maybe you could take a plant for a headache, like feverfew, right? Or peppermint can help with headaches. So making a tea, you can start that process and you go, oh, it really did help. Oh, how about those fennel seeds? They're great for a tummy ache, right? So starting to that gentle, slow introduction for you to build up your confidence. So I just want to go back to talking about the gardens for a sec, because I was mentioning that it's important to have that diversity. So we've got vegetables, we want culinary herbs, we want to have some medicines growing in there. So that could be St. John's wort, yarrow, calendula flowers, mallow, elecampane. There's many. And think about what are some of the medicines in your region that you might want to be growing. Holy basil is another beautiful one. So bring those into your garden, and you want to have the berries. So here on the West Coast, we have something like 23 different varieties of berries. Wow. Strawberries, raspberries, salmon berries, thimbleberries, blackberries, right? I brought Marc some blackberry jam. So there's some beautiful blackberry jam for Marc.
Lori, also there's a lot of, herbal tinctures and, lotions and potions and things of that nature. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
That. If you could only taste this, if we don't have a smell of
yeah, really.
I'd share it with you. I really would.
And just so you know, color is really important for the body to help it stay, if I could even say, cancer-free. Yeah. Antioxidants, tons of antioxidants. And blackberry in particular has the highest iron concentration of all of the berries. Wow. And we have a lot of blackberry that grow here in this area.
People pay like $6 for a little tub,
yeah,
when you can go for a walk in the park and pick a bucket for nothing.
Totally.
Like it's business, my friends.
Yeah. And then there's that slowing down, right? There's your meditation. There is your building that relationship. And in that, you're going to do practices of reciprocity. Mm-hmm. So asking permission, bringing something to say thank you, of gratitude. And that can be a sacred plant. Mm-hmm. It, like tobacco is one of our sacred plants. Maybe it's just a song or a prayer, right? Bring your drum. And then what you want to do specifically for the blackberry, as with the salmonberry, you want to do some trimming. Because when we actually trim our gardens, mm-hmm. A couple things happen. The plant sends down more roots, so it stabilizes itself better. It produces more leaf, which is actually taking more carbon. And with our blackberry, because we have a Himalayan blackberry, which is an invasive blackberry, she's actually an opportunist. I never think of anything as invasive. Just, is she a good guest or not?
And here's the reality. It's just, and I don't mean just in a minimized term, nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's what nature
Totally.
does.
Totally.
Right? If you want to look for answers in life, man, look to nature.
Yeah.
They've got lots
Yeah.
of answers.
Well, I feel that the blackberry is actually trying to get our attention. She's trying to say, excuse me, I have lots of iron for you. I'm here. The beautiful antioxidants. You can make tea with my leaf. You can use that to wash your skin. It's antimicrobial. So somebody who maybe has some acne, which is an overproduction of bacteria on the skin, this will help to keep that balance. There's beautiful medicine in the root. We can make dyes with it, and we can take these beautiful long canes and we can actually do weaving. Because here's what's happening, Marc. So with this whole pandemic, I started looking at some of the symbolism here. We have it, the virus is coming into the lungs, and the lungs represent grief. And let's think about it. It came out of China. I cannot even imagine what it must be like for those factory workers making products for us all over the world, and for
next to nothing.
Exactly. So what kind of grief are they carrying? That would be one. The other is that our heart, which connects to our hands, and we're asked to wash our hands a lot, right? So that's connecting to our heart. Our hands are about a handmade life. It's about us starting to make products again, right? To be in the garden, to do the canning, right? To make that beautiful food, right? Using our hands. And when we gift, we're gifting from our heart. So what a beautiful, experience.
Look at Christmas.
Right.
Christmas is just, I was spending 22 years in retail. I dreaded it because I was the guy who planned our holiday and Christmas shops and stuff. But it's become such a commercial. Like, look at the stress people get. It's like, I don't know what to get people. The malls are packed. People are freaking out when it's about giving.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
make
something.
A handmade life. That's the era.
Love that, a handmade life.
So that's where we're moving towards, right? And really, if we think about it, we need to create more of a local economy versus a global economy, right?
Well, and this comes down to waking up to the reality of who's running the world, where the money's going, and how we're getting caught into consumerism and buying stuff we just don't need, and like the blatant consumerism of all this crap getting thrown in the landfills. We don't need all sorts of plastic crap from all over the world. It's like, I've had opportunities to sell and do products and market things, and it's like, people don't need that.
Right.
I'm not selling something I don't think people need and that will enhance their life.
And the other is, what do we call ourselves? Do we call ourselves consumers? Or do we call ourselves citizens? And when we call ourselves citizens, the context changes. That's where, what is my role as a citizen? What are my responsibilities? And how do I contribute? Somebody not too long ago was talking about raising children, and to bring that value to our children as we are emulating. Well, how am I contributing to the family? How am I contributing outside of the family into the community, right? So like really thinking about words, you mentioned words earlier. I'm a citizen. I'm not a consumer. I'm a citizen, right? And I think that's really important. So the last thing about the garden, just so I just wanted to kind of finish that, is so the berries are really important. So whatever berries are growing in your local area, I'd really highly recommend, because they're super expensive. They're really good for you.
And they're really easy to
grow. So if you don't have a lot of time in your garden to do the zucchini and the tomatoes and potatoes, then just do berries. That's what in my garden, it's all berries, right? Because I'm busy teaching or being out or playing, because play is resistance, right? Knowing the land is resistance, and play is resistance. The other component, so in your garden, you want to have the wild plants. So those wild weeds, because they're going to be really good for the pollinators in that. But as I said, they can also be our medicines and our foods, right?
So here's a question I have. We've got about 12 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
So I know.
Wow.
Time flies when
Yes.
we're having fun.
Yeah. Totally.
So I guess one of my next questions is, so we talked about the dandelion, we talked about berries and common things. I think some people are becoming more aware of the dandelion, and more every day. What are the other, like if you were to mention a few other like common. It's a weed, but and the reality is it's really good for you. Because I know we came in our yard and it's like this one thing. It's like we had it all clear. We did a bunch of work. And then next thing you know, it just took over. And I'm like, I hate that thing. And you go, oh no, love it. And that was the Japanese knotweed.
Yes.
And you said, if you have a house in England, you'll never sell it with that. Right? So what else? It might just be in people's backyards or front yards or sidewalks.
Okay. So we've got one's called chickweed.
Mm-hmm.
Another one's called landcrust, which is part of the cardamom family or a mustard family. It's very spicy. The chickweed's just like eating a green, like a salad green. You have lamb's quarter, which refers to as pigweed, part of the amaranth family. There's a lot growing in India, so that's cook it up like a spinach. Plantain, white man's footprint. That's what we referred to it when it arrived here, because everywhere they walked, another plant would grow. But so this is a food and a medicine. That leaf, which is sort of egg-shaped, or it can be long, and how you're going to identify it, it's got lines or ribbing on the back of the leaf. So this is a beautiful one for the kids to know, because if they should be running around in their bare feet, remember, so they're touching the earth. Is if they've stepped on a bee, then they're going to take that plantain and chew it to open up the enzymes to neutralize the poison or that venom that's going in the body.
Nature
right?
has the answers.
Yes. And that's a really amazing medicine to help pull infections out of the body. Who else comes to mind? Thistle is another one. Okay, I'm just trying to think. Yellow dock, burdock, right? Really important plants for iron in the root. And what I also say is be mindful of where you're harvesting and know the history of that site. So for instance, my house was born. I say that every time, born. It was built in 1910.
It's kind of a born.
It's kind of a born. So here's what happens around construction sites. And it's one of the things that drives me crazy. And I just don't have the time. And I'd love for someone else to take it up, is to go around our construction sites. Because what happens is they throw everything in the ground and then they come and they put soil on top. So you've got paint and nails and plastic and all kinds of things that are in there. So right around my house, I wouldn't necessarily dig up that dandelion root, because it will pull in those toxins and those metals, right? Now, you can use plants to remediate your soil and take the lead out, which can be mushrooms and sunflowers. But
We've
here,
got tons of mushrooms in our yard.
Right.
They were calling it the mushroom house the other
right.
day. It's like, what are all of these?
Yeah. So yeah, for sure. Know your mushrooms, right? Because a lot of those are medicinal and edible. So yeah, get to know, find out if there's someone local in your area who does some teachings or get some good books. Get some really good books, right? Learn to really identify them, and then find some books that also can help you how to cook with them, how to make the medicine, when to harvest, what are the stories, how do you build that particular relationship.
And I like to even throw in is find community, find groups where you can learn from each other, support each other, because they're out there. And it also helps in creating the movement, create the change by spreading the word.
Yes.
Yeah. Share what you know. When you learn the stuff and get lit up by it, share that knowledge, share that wisdom and information, because this is what we need to make a better world for all of humanity, is really get back to natural living.
Yes.
And that's a plant-based diet. I'm not a meat eater myself. So it's important, to have clean, healthy food. And if you can do it yourself, why not?
Yeah.
And what's grown in your yards is amazing when you start really seeing what's there. The stuff I had no idea would actually, like the Japanese knotweed, for example, it was just like, really?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like the benefits just for Lyme disease, you were talking about
with the root.
Yeah, the root. So there's a lot of great stuff out there, and our purpose and our mission here with this program today is to inspire you to be curious, to say, what's in my yard? What's local that I can do? Or maybe it's time to start a garden.
Yeah.
Or whatever that is for you. Our mission to inspire that in you is just because there's a naturalness to it. Right, and it's something that I personally feel is important. It supports the PMC, mandate of a plant-based diet, and there's so many different things. Plants are our teachers, and we haven't even talked about psychedelic plants. That'll be next week with Dennis McKenna, because I know when we heard some stuff, she says, I think our community's interested in that, and not a lot of people are talking about it openly a lot. However, a lot more we certainly are, and all plants are teachers. All plants are medicines. And if you want to heal yourself well, always look at nature. Always look at nature to the answer. A pharmaceutical is not going to, I'm not saying that there's not a place for pharmaceuticals. Please don't get me wrong. I think there is a place. Do I think it's being, maybe overdone? Yes. And we're all waking up to the power of big pharma and politics and what's happening in business and economy and everything else. And, it's like, just like when you say, World War II, we had victory gardens. We were being encouraged back then before we got dummied down, right? And then they go, oh, DuPont or whoever comes around with all the next thing you know, cannabis is illegal and hemp and all of those things, all for the sake of plastic and business and chemicals. And then they're telling us to get rid of, they make dandelion a weed instead of a food. There's this element of control, and my perception and experience is kind of coming down from these people kind of controlling and running the world in that way. Because if we all grew a garden in our yard, if we all supported each other, there's enough food that would grow on this square block to feed this whole block, right? And then next thing you know, how many people are out of business? And that's big business because everybody's got to eat. Right.
We all have to eat for sure. And, one of the things that, people have said to me, Lori, I'm looking at the world differently after coming and playing with you. Because I've said to them, when I'm meeting plants, my first question is, who are you? So I really want to know who that plant is, right? What's the identification here? Learn the Latin name, or for sure get the Latin name. And then I can plug in and then I go, that Latin name, edible, medicinal, and then I can start to do my research to find out, wow, can I eat it? Or what kind of medicine can I actually make with it, right?
Well, so you make tinctures, you make all sorts of
yeah. Infuse it in honeys, create your own aerosols, put your plants in your apple cider vinegar. That's going to help to extract out the mineral base, right? And minerals are really important for the endocrine system. So for our hormone health, we can also extract it into alcohol, which works more as a medicine. So when I have an infection in the body, I can use it that way. We can put it, I mentioned the honeys and glycerins, and of course, just water.
Yeah.
Water is a solvent, right? It's going to actually pull out some of those chemical components. So depending on the plant and what you're looking for, what components are you looking for? And here's the thing about plant medicines is it's a holistic, it's the whole plant. So even though we can isolate it, for instance, like salicin that we get from willow is isolated into aspirin. Okay, but people get a lot of side effects.
Well, and remember, all pharmaceuticals come from a plant
usually
based, unless they're synthetic, but it's always inspired by nature and inspired by plants. And a friend of mine, I did an interview years ago with a woman do you know Sherry Strong? She's about sugar. How sugar lights up the brain more than cocaine and heroin and all the opioid receptors and everything else. And we all get hooked on that. And she said something that was really profound to me. She said, anytime you take something green and make it white, it's a drug.
Right.
Because you need the full components of the plant to have proper symbiosis.
Yeah.
Because if you strip out all that one great component, you're missing all the other parts of the plant that work in symbiosis. Right. For the total healing.
Yeah.
But if you take out all of the, the fibers and the chlorophyll and everything else, you concentrate it, you're getting a medicine. However, I personally believe that plant is going to be your better medicine because it's whole.
Yeah, right. Sugarcane's beautiful. It's delightful, right? You're going to get those minerals. So with the aspirin has actually known to cause death, lots of side effects. Now, if you drink the willow tea, either the leaf, the bark, or the twig, it's going to also work as a pain reliever. it will be slower acting, so it won't be so immediate, and it will be gentler on the body, and it will probably last longer, because all of those other components, we don't always understand what that communication is, what's actually happening there, right? So what a beautiful gift our living world really is, and that we're part of this living world.
Well, Lori, we're running out of time, and the one thing, if anybody's curious or wants to know more, Lori, you do workshops. You're starting a whole online program now coming up, just because you're so busy. People are really wanting to know what you're sharing. So maybe you can tell our viewers how they can get a hold of you if they want to follow up, learn more, take a deeper dive with plants as medicine.
Okay. So Lori Snyder, Lori Snyder, SNYDER.co has got a few of, there's a site where you can actually buy pre-recorded teachings. I'm working with a collective guild, and I'll be doing a 3-month series. So we'll meet twice a month. And I just put out on Airbnb some dates. Marc and I are going to be putting some other dates together. So that's coming. And tomorrow, Tuesday morning, if you're here in the Vancouver area, at 7:30 in the morning, we're going to meet down at Spanish Banks West at the concession stand. And we are going to do a silent spirit plant medicine walk on the low tide. So if you'd like to join us, that's $18. It's my girlfriend and I. I'm hoping Marc will come out with us. And so we're going to walk out on the low tide down on Spanish Banks and then into the forest. So we'll probably be out for like 3 to 4 hours. So we're going to, or I would say at least 3 hours. I mean, you can obviously leave whenever you want. You don't necessarily have to have any spirit plant medicine. You can just come and be silent and walk the land. As I said earlier, knowing the land is resistance, play is resistance. So hopefully I'll get to meet you all. Send me, on my website, it's got my email address, earthandcompanyinfo@gmail.com. And please, I'd love to hear from you. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me there. And you can always contact Marc, and he'll always find me.
And you can always find me at yourwakeupcall.ca. You can find me through the PCM Global community as well. I'm always here to help anyone and serve humanity in a better way. And this is the way we're doing it. That's why we want people to wake up to the reality of what's around them, to nature, to life, to love, to the plants, to the animals. Even my little dog who's laying over there, he's just camped right out. So, that's my mission is to, be an inspiration and share, practical knowledge to change the world. And
beautiful.
Plants are just one of the way. And I think they're one of the most powerful ways, because the more we get back to nature, the more we, get back to ourselves, the more we create a better world.
Yeah.
And, that's really what it's all about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Marc. And thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you, Lori. It's always a pleasure. I'm always inspired when we have our talks, because I'm always learning something and just inspired to do more with what we've got in the yard and what's around. And, now it's to balance the time and the priorities to do it right.
Great.
So,
beautiful.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Next week on Your Wake Up Call, it's going to be Dennis McKenna. We're going to talk more plants, psychedelic plants, which is a much interesting topic that is just kind of changing the world, right? And they are medicine, but they're very different than just eating, herbs out of the garden. So join us next week with Dennis McKenna. Any questions, put them in the comments, send us an email. And thank you very much, Lori, for joining us.
Beautiful.
Until next week, guys, take care.